I never thought I'd find myself trembling in my own office, surrounded by two stern-faced men whose grim expressions hinted at secrets too dreadful to be spoken. The director paced behind his desk, his gaze occasionally drifting to me, as if bracing himself for a reaction he knew would come. My boss, Ben, didn't mince words. His face tightened, his eyes holding something between pity and urgency. "Thomas," he began slowly, "there's something you need to know about your wife." My heart froze as he spoke her name, and in that instant, my entire world teetered on the brink. My name is Thomas Selfridge, and at 38, I'd consider myself a pretty typical guy. I'm a code analyst working for the National Security Agency, NSA, in Fort Meade, Maryland. Not exactly the most glamorous job in the world, but it suits me just fine. I've always had a mind for puzzles, and there's a certain satisfaction that comes from uncovering secrets hidden in lines of code, secrets that could threaten national security if left unsolved. It's the kind of job that requires patience, attention to detail, and a fair amount of solitude, qualities I used to pride myself on. My wife, Jenny, on the other hand, was the light to my shadow. She was always the social one, the person everyone gravitated toward at parties with her quick wit, infectious laugh, and disarming smile. Jenny had this warm, easygoing charm that could melt even the iciest hearts. She was a preschool teacher, a job that suited her nurturing nature and boundless energy. Watching her with the kids was like witnessing magic. She had this way of making each child feel like they were the most important person in the world. That was one of the things that drew me to her in the first place, back when we met in college. We met during our senior year at the University of Maryland. I was deep into my computer science major, spending most of my time in the library or computer lab. Social gatherings weren't my thing, but my roommate, Jeff, insisted I go to a party he was throwing. He said, "You're going to meet your future wife at one of these things if you just show up." I laughed it off, but he was persistent. So, I put on my best attempt at casual party attire and showed up, feeling out of place among the crowd. And then, there she was, Jenny. She had this effortless beauty, with dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders and eyes that sparkled with a mischievous glint. I must have been staring, because she caught my eye and walked right over with a smile that made my stomach flip. "Hey, you look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," she said, laughing, and just like that, we started talking. One conversation turned into another, and before I knew it, I was captivated. Jenny had this incredible way of seeing the world, a sense of wonder and optimism that balanced out my logical, often skeptical, approach to life. We became inseparable. Graduation came, and we decided to start our lives together. I landed a job with the NSA, which was a huge deal for me, and Jenny started teaching. We got married a year later in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends and family who knew us as the perfect match. The reserved tech guy and the outgoing teacher, each completing the other. Our lives settled into a comfortable routine. We bought a cozy little bungalow in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Baltimore. Jenny made the place feel like home with her personal touches, soft blankets on every couch, framed pictures from our trips, and plants that she somehow kept alive. She was great with our neighbors, quickly becoming friends with the other women in the neighborhood. They'd often have little gatherings, trading recipes and stories, while I was either working late or tinkering with some new piece of tech. Though our love seemed solid, things weren't always perfect. My job at the NSA demanded a lot from me, sometimes pulling me away at odd hours or keeping me distracted even when I was home. Jenny would often joke that she was married to a ghost, but there was an edge to her voice that hinted it wasn't entirely a joke. I tried to make it up to her with weekend getaways or date nights whenever I could, but I knew it wasn't always enough. The one thing we always agreed on was our decision not to have kids. Jenny adored children, but she felt she could make more of a difference working with them in a school setting rather than being tied down at home. I supported her completely, knowing that being a mom wasn't a dream she harbored. Our families thought it was odd, especially Jenny's mom, who would drop hints about grandchildren every chance she got. But Jenny was firm in her choice, and I respected her for it. Over the years, we settled into the patterns that married life brings. Weekdays were spent at work, evenings together if I was lucky enough to get home on time. Weekends were a blend of errands, occasional outings, and lazy Sundays. We had our favorite traditions: Saturday movie nights, Friday dinners at the diner down the road, and holiday gatherings with our families. Life was steady, maybe even predictable. But that's what I thought made us strong. We were solid, unshakable. Things started to shift a couple of months ago, though I didn't notice it immediately. Ginny began spending more time with her friends, which wasn't unusual, but the frequency of her outings increased. She'd mention a friend going through a rough patch or needing support, and she'd be out late, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. I told myself it was nothing to worry about. Ginny had always been the type to be there for others, and I admired that about her. But there was something different, a subtle distance growing between us that I couldn't quite place. One night, she mentioned she'd be going to her friend Lisa's house. Lisa had just gone through a rough breakup, and Ginny insisted that she needed to be there for her. I trusted Ginny completely, so I didn't question it. But as the nights of comforting a friend piled up, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling gnawing at me. I brushed it off, blaming it on the stress of my job and the fact that I was seeing less of her. The week before Christmas, things got even stranger. Ginny was quieter, more distant, and seemed lost in thought even when she was home. I noticed her looking at her phone more often, typing away with a look of concentration that I hadn't seen before. When I asked her if everything was okay, she'd just smile and say she was fine, assuring me that it was just holiday stress. I believed her, or maybe I wanted to believe her. In hindsight, I realize now that I was clinging to the comfort of familiarity, the idea that everything was fine because it had always been fine. On Christmas Eve, Ginny told me she'd be spending some time with Lisa. She kissed me on the cheek, wished me a Merry Christmas, and left with a smile that felt just a bit too forced. I sat alone that night, telling myself that she'd be back soon, but as the hours ticked by, doubt began to creep in. Midnight came and went, and I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to us, to the couple who had once seemed so unbreakable. Then came the day after Christmas, when everything came crashing down. I was just settling down with my morning coffee, flipping through the extreme Sudoku puzzle I like to solve before work, when my phone rang. It was my boss, Ben, calling me into the office. "It's urgent, Thomas," he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. "I need you here right away." "What's going on, Ben?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "I'll explain when you get here. Just come in as soon as you can." I scribbled a note to Ginny, who was still out, letting her know I'd been called in unexpectedly. The drive to the office was a blur, my mind racing through all the worst-case scenarios. In our line of work, an urgent call could mean anything, from a national security threat to a classified breach. But as I walked into Ben's office and saw the look on his face, I knew this wasn't a typical call. Ben was sitting behind his desk, looking unusually grave. Beside him was our director, who rarely showed up unless there was something serious. "Thomas, please sit down," Ben said, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. The director remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "What's going on?" I asked, glancing between the two of them, my anxiety mounting with every second of silence. Ben cleared his throat, exchanging a brief look with the director. "Thomas, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to come out with it. We've uncovered some personal information that you need to know." I felt my stomach drop, my mind reeling. "Personal information? What are you talking about?" The director took a step forward, his voice steady but tinged with something close to sympathy. "Your wife, Ginny. She's been seeing someone else. We discovered this while monitoring another case, and unfortunately, her actions came to light as a result." I stared at him, the words barely registering. It felt like a bad dream, a cruel joke that didn't make any sense. Ginny? The woman I'd built my life with? The one person I thought I could trust beyond anyone else? "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There has to be a mistake. Ginny wouldn't. She wouldn't do that." Ben looked at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. "Thomas, I know this is hard to hear. Believe me, we wouldn't have told you if there was any other way. But there's more you need to know." The words hung in the air, echoing around me as I sat in Ben's office, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Ginny, my wife, the woman I had spent over a decade with, was having an affair. I could barely process the information, let alone come to terms with it. But Ben and the director were watching me intently, as if waiting for me to react, to confirm that I understood what they just told me. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, every nerve on edge. No, I muttered, shaking my head. There has to be some mistake. Ginny wouldn't do that. She just wouldn't. I tried to summon the anger, the disbelief, the refusal to believe that the woman I loved was capable of such betrayal. But as I looked at the solemn faces of the two men in front of me, it became clear that there was no mistake. They wouldn't lie about something like this, not when they knew how devastating it would be for me. Ben reached across his desk and placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. Thomas, I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm sorry that we had to be the ones to tell you. But there's something else you need to know. My head snapped up, a mix of confusion and dread creeping into my mind. What else could there possibly be? What more could they reveal that would make this situation any worse? But as Ben continued, I realized that I had only just begun to uncover the true extent of Ginny's betrayal. We didn't discover this by accident, he said, his gaze steady. Ginny's lover is under surveillance. He's suspected of involvement in terrorist activities, and we've been monitoring him closely for the past several months. I felt my blood run cold. Terrorist activities? The word sounded surreal, like something out of a spy thriller, not something that could ever touch my personal life. But here I was, in the middle of a nightmare that seemed to grow darker with every passing moment. Her lover? I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Who is he? The director stepped forward, his expression grim. His name is Amir Al-Rahim, and he's been on our radar for quite some time. We believe he's associated with a terrorist organization, and his activities have raised some serious red flags. Unfortunately, that means that Ginny has been caught up in something far more dangerous than she likely realizes. I sat there, numb with disbelief. Ginny, my Ginny, the sweet, caring woman I had married, was involved with a man who was potentially linked to terrorists? It was almost impossible to comprehend. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make sense of the madness that had suddenly invaded my life. But instead, I could only sit there, my mind racing as I tried to process the nightmare I had just been plunged into. Ben gave me a sympathetic look, his hand still resting on my shoulder. I know this is a lot, Thomas. Believe me, we wish there was some other way to tell you. But given the circumstances, you needed to know the truth. We didn't want to keep you in the dark, not when you're so close to this situation. I swallowed hard, the enormity of the situation finally beginning to sink in. Ginny had betrayed me, not only by being unfaithful but by getting involved with a man who was a potential threat to national security. I felt a surge of anger, a white-hot rage that threatened to consume me. How could she do this? How could she put me, and herself, in such a dangerous situation? Where is she now? I asked, my voice tight with barely suppressed fury. Ben exchanged a glance with the director before answering. We don't know. She's been meeting with him sporadically, and it's difficult to predict when or where they'll meet next. But we do have surveillance on him, so we'll know if they make contact again. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up inside me like a volcano on the verge of eruption. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to make her explain why she had done this to me, to us. But I also knew that doing so could put her in even more danger, especially if Amir was as dangerous as they suspected. The director's voice broke through my thoughts. Thomas, I understand that you're angry and hurt, and I don't blame you. But I need to ask you to keep this information confidential. We're still investigating Amir, and if Ginny finds out that we're onto him, it could jeopardize the entire operation. For now, we need you to act as though nothing has changed. I stared at him, the words sinking in. Keep it confidential? Act as though nothing has changed? How could they expect me to go home and pretend that everything was normal, to look Ginny in the eye and pretend that I didn't know about her betrayal? But as much as I hated the idea, I knew they were right. If I confronted her now, it could put everything at risk, and I couldn't let my anger and hurt endanger the investigation. Taking a deep breath, I nodded, though the action felt hollow. Fine. I'll keep it to myself, but I want updates. I want to know what's happening with her, with him. The director nodded, his expression sympathetic. We'll keep you in the loop, Thomas. And if there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out. This is an incredibly difficult situation, and we're here to support you. With that, the meeting was over. I left the office, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, disbelief. As I drove home, The reality of the situation hit me with full force. The woman I loved, the woman I had shared my life with, had not only betrayed me but had gotten involved with someone who was potentially dangerous. It was a betrayal so deep, so raw, that I wasn't sure I would ever be able to forgive her. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house that had once felt like a haven but now felt like a prison. How was I supposed to go inside, to look at Ginny and pretend that everything was normal? But I knew that I had no choice. For now, I had to play along, to act as though nothing had changed. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and got out of the car. When I opened the door, I was greeted by the familiar smell of our home, the faint scent of lavender from Ginny's candles, the hint of coffee lingering from the morning. It was a scene that should have brought me comfort, but now it only served as a painful reminder of the life I thought I had, a life that had been shattered by Ginny's betrayal. Ginny was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. She looked up as I walked in, her face lighting up with a smile that twisted like a knife in my chest. "Hey, you're home early," she said, closing the book and standing up to give me a hug. I stiffened, the feel of her arms around me almost unbearable, knowing what I knew. "Yeah, I had a light day at the office," I replied, forcing a smile as I pulled away from her embrace. She tilted her head, her eyes searching my face. "You okay? You seem a little off." I forced another smile, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "I'm fine, just tired." She seemed to accept that, her smile returning as she led me to the kitchen. "Well, I'm making your favorite tonight, spaghetti and meatballs. Figured we could have a cozy night in." I nodded, the familiar routine feeling surreal. She was acting as though everything was normal, as though nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. My world had been turned upside down, and I was living a nightmare I couldn't escape. Over the next few days, I tried to keep up the facade, to act as though nothing was wrong. But every time I looked at Ginny, I felt the anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew that doing so could put her, and the investigation, in danger. I watched her carefully, noting every detail, every moment of her day. She went about her usual routine, going to work, meeting up with friends, and coming home in the evenings as if nothing had changed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on beneath the surface, that she was hiding something from me. Then, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. Ginny had gone out, saying she was meeting a friend for drinks, and I knew that I couldn't sit idly by any longer. I waited until she left, then followed her, my heart pounding as I kept a safe distance behind her car. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to see for myself, to confront the truth with my own eyes. She drove to a small, dimly lit restaurant on the outskirts of town, parking her car and heading inside. I waited a few minutes before following, my hands shaking as I approached the door. I had no plan, no idea what I would do if I saw her with him, but I couldn't turn back now. Inside, the restaurant was quiet, the soft hum of conversation filling the air. I scanned the room, my heart hammering as I looked for Ginny. And then, I saw her. She was sitting in a corner booth, her face alight with a smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. Across from her sat a man, his back to me, but I could see the way he leaned in close, his hand resting on hers. I felt a surge of rage, a visceral need to confront them, to demand answers. But I held myself back, forcing myself to watch, to take in every detail. Ginny was laughing, her eyes sparkling in a way that I hadn't seen in years. It was as if she was a different person, someone I didn't recognize. They talked, laughed, and shared intimate glances that twisted like knives in my chest. I felt like an outsider, a stranger watching a scene that had once been my own life. And then, they leaned in, their faces inches apart, and I knew what was coming. I turned away, unable to bear the sight, the final confirmation of what I had already known but hadn't wanted to believe. I left the restaurant, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had betrayed me in the most intimate, devastating way possible. And as I drove home, the anger and hurt twisted into something darker, something that burned with a fierce intensity. When Ginny finally came home, I was waiting for her, my face a mask of forced calm. She looked at me, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Hey, you're still up?" she said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. I nodded, my gaze steady as I watched her, waiting for her to crack, to admit the truth. But she only smiled, her eyes avoiding mine as she hurried past me and went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts, with the terrible truth that had shattered my life. And that night, as I lay awake, the anger and betrayal boiled over, transforming into a fierce determination. Ginny had betrayed me, shattered the life we had built together. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I was going to make her pay. That night, lying in bed, my mind buzzed with thoughts too loud to silence. The betrayal had cut deep, festering like a wound that wouldn't heal. Ginny slept soundly beside me, blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside me. I watched her, feeling an unfamiliar chill seep through my veins. There she was, the woman I had loved and trusted, lying next to me as if she hadn't shattered everything we built together. But it was clear to me now. The life I thought I knew was gone, and there was no going back. I realized that confronting her in a direct, explosive confrontation would be useless. If I did that, I'd never get the answers I needed. The lies would keep coming, one after another, and I'd be left just as broken as before, with nothing resolved. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to make her feel the pain she'd inflicted on me, to show her that I was not someone to be toyed with. She needed to understand the gravity of what she had done, and pay for it. The first thing I did was gather information. If Ginny had secrets, I was determined to uncover every single one of them. While she was at work the next day, I went through her things, starting with her phone, which she'd left charging on the kitchen counter. I scrolled. The anger that simmered within me transformed into a dark resolve. It wasn't enough to confront her, to make her confess. I needed to dismantle her life, to tear down the world she thought she could live in without consequence. And I knew exactly where to start. I decided to reach out to the people she valued most, her friends, her family, and her colleagues. They knew Ginny as a caring, loyal woman, the kind of person who would do anything for others. I wanted them to see her true colors, to understand the kind of betrayal she was capable of. I knew that revealing her affair would be a shock to them, but I didn't care. I was past caring about her reputation or the pain it would cause her. This was about justice, about showing her that actions have consequences. First, I contacted Lisa, her best friend and the one person she had used as a cover for her lies. I crafted a message, keeping my tone calm and measured, as if I were simply informing her of a painful truth. Next, I contacted Ginny's family. I knew this would be the most painful step, not just for Ginny but for her parents, who had always adored her. Her mother, in particular, had always viewed Ginny as the perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong. I sent a message to her mother, outlining the affair in the same calm, factual tone. I wanted her to know that her daughter was not the person she thought she was, that she was capable of betraying the man who had loved her for over a decade. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Ginny's phone was flooded with messages from her friends and family, each one demanding an explanation, expressing shock and disbelief. I watched as she tried to respond, her face pale as she realized that her secrets had been exposed. She was scrambling, desperate to control the damage, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As she sat in the living room, frantically texting and calling, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since I discovered her betrayal, I felt in control, as if I was finally reclaiming a part of myself that she had tried to destroy. I watched her struggle, feeling no sympathy, only the cold, calculated satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. But I wasn't done yet. Exposing her affair was just the beginning. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand that there was no escape from the consequences she had brought upon herself. The next step in my plan was to dismantle her career, the one part of her life that she had always prided herself on. Ginny was a respected teacher, known for her dedication and passion for her students. She had always been proud of her work, of the impact she had on young lives. But I knew that the affair, if exposed in the right way, could ruin her career, tarnishing the reputation she had worked so hard to build. I began compiling the evidence I had gathered, the messages, the photos, the details of her deceit, and prepared to send them to her school. I crafted a letter, carefully worded to ensure that it would have the maximum impact. I described her affair in detail, explaining how she had lied and manipulated not only me but those around her. I attached the evidence, making it clear that this was not a baseless accusation but a cold, hard truth. I knew that once the school received the letter, there would be no way for her to escape the consequences. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for would be gone. When I finally sent the letter, I felt a sense of finality, as if I had severed the last remaining tie between us. Ginny had destroyed our marriage, and now I had destroyed the life she had built on lies and deceit. There was no going back, no chance for redemption. She had made her choice, and now she would live with the consequences. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and confusion. Ginny tried to salvage her reputation, to explain her actions, but the damage was done. Her friends and family had turned against her, her career was in ruins, and she was left with nothing but the shattered remnants of a life she had taken for granted. I watched her spiral, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel the weight of my own actions. I had set out to punish Ginny, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me, but in doing so, I had destroyed a part of myself. The anger and resentment that had fueled me had left me hollow, a shell of the man I once was. I had won, but the victory felt empty, a hollow echo of the life I had once known. In the end, I had become a stranger to myself, a man consumed by anger and hatred. And as I looked at the wreckage of our lives, I wondered if there was any way to find redemption, to rebuild what had been lost. But I knew that it was too late, that the damage had been done, and there was no going back. And so, I was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret, the realization that in seeking revenge, I had lost the very thing I had set out to protect, myself. The house was silent. For weeks now, the walls that had once held laughter, warmth, and comfort felt foreign, empty. Ginny moved around as if in a trance, a shadow of her former self. Her gaze was hollow, and every now and then, I'd catch her looking at me with something between despair and disbelief. She no longer tried to explain, to reach out, or to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. We shared the same roof but lived in separate worlds, each haunted by our own regrets. I spent my nights in the living room, lying awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling as memories flooded my mind. Images of the life we once had played like a slideshow I couldn't turn off. The laughter, the whispered promises, the plans we'd made for a future that no longer existed. They lingered, reminders of a happiness that now felt like a cruel illusion. One evening, I found myself holding the wedding ring I had removed weeks ago, feeling its weight in my hand. It was just a piece of metal, but it symbolized everything we'd once believed in. I turned it over, watching how it caught the light, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Had I gone too far? Was there a line I should have drawn but hadn't seen? Ginny entered the room, her gaze falling to the ring in my hand. She didn't say anything, but her eyes, filled with unspoken sorrow, met mine. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had once loved, the woman I had vowed to protect. We stared at each other in silence, each of us searching for words that wouldn't come, questions that couldn't be asked. The silence stretched, heavy and fraught with a lifetime's worth of regret. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the ring in my hand and the emptiness in my heart. I knew that no words, no gestures, could ever undo the choices we'd both made. We had destroyed each other, left scars that would never fully heal. I sat there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, wondering if there was any chance for forgiveness, for redemption. But as I looked around the empty room, I realized that some things couldn't be fixed, that some wounds were too deep to ever truly heal. In the end, all I could do was let go, to release the memories, the love, and the pain. I placed the ring on the table and walked out of the room, knowing that I was leaving behind not just a marriage but a part of myself that I would never get back. As I closed the door, I felt a strange sense of peace, tempered with a sorrow that would stay with me for the rest of my life. The future was uncertain, shadowed by the choices we had made, But for the first time, I felt ready to face it alone.